What if I told you that two men could perform the exact same action in the same place at the same time, yet one is raised to paradise and the other is dragged to the fire? The difference is not in their strength, their wealth, or their eloquence. It lies in something hidden, invisible to human eyes, but fully exposed before Allah: intention. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and stay until the end of this story, because what you're about to hear could change the way you see every action in your life. More than 7 centuries ago, in the streets of Damascus, there lived a scholar whose words still echo in the hearts of believers today: Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah. He was not a king nor a warrior, but his influence traveled further than the swords of empires. Born in 1292, he became the student of the great reformer Ibn Taymiyyah, inheriting not just knowledge, but courage, the courage to remind people that Islam is not measured by appearances, but by sincerity. Picture the Damascus of his time, the markets crowded with merchants shouting their prices, the mosques alive with voices of Quran, and at the same time, the whispers of hypocrisy weaving through society. Scholars debated endlessly, rulers played politics, and many wore religion like a mask. Yet Ibn al-Qayyim, sitting with ink-stained fingers in his study, was focused on something far deeper: the heart. He once wrote that a deed without intention is like a body without a soul. Imagine someone praying beautifully, every movement perfect, every word clear. But in his heart, he is only performing for the people around him. That prayer rises no higher than the ceiling above his head. Another man, whose prayer is broken, trembling, even stammering, but his heart bleeds with sincerity. That prayer rises to the heavens, welcomed by the angels. This is the reminder Ibn al-Qayyim wanted the world never to forget. And it wasn't his own invention. He was simply repeating the timeless truth of the Quran and the Sunnah. The Prophet Muhammad said, "Actions are judged only by intentions, and every man shall have only what he intended." Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. Think about that for a moment. Your deeds are not judged by how impressive they look on the outside, but by the engine driving them inside. Ibn al-Qayyim carried this hadith like a torch through the darkness of his age. He knew how easily people could lose themselves in outward forms, building great mosques, giving generous charity, reciting long du'as. But if the intention is poisoned by pride, arrogance, or desire for reputation, then the entire effort becomes weightless. One story from his time makes this painfully clear. A wealthy man once donated a large sum to repair a mosque, and the people praised him as a pillar of the community. Yet behind closed doors, he whispered to a friend, "Did you see how they mentioned my name in the khutbah? They will never forget me now." Ibn al-Qayyim would call this man a bankrupt trader in the market of the hereafter. His investment looked large, but it had no value before Allah. On the other side, there was a poor student of knowledge who spent his nights copying books by candlelight. His back bent, his eyes strained, he earned only a few coins for his work. But he kept saying, "O Allah, I do this only to preserve your knowledge, to teach the next generation." In the world's eyes, he was invisible. In Allah's sight, he was immense. Ibn al-Qayyim himself lived with this principle. Despite imprisonment with his teacher Ibn Taymiyyah, despite ridicule from those in power, he wrote and taught with unwavering sincerity. His legacy is proof that what is hidden in the heart can outlast empires. So ask yourself, when you pray, when you give, when you smile, when you speak? What is your intention? Do you want the eyes of people, or do you want the pleasure of the one who created those eyes? Stay with me, because in the next part we will dive deeper into the world of Ibn al-Qayyim, the storms of his era, and how he fought to keep the flame of sincerity alive in a society drowning in appearances. The streets of Damascus in the 14th century were alive with movement and contradiction. Merchants shouted their prices, children darted between the stalls, and in the mosques the recitation of Quran floated over the city like perfume. Yet beneath the surface, corruption spread quietly. Scholars competed for recognition, rulers used religion for their politics, and many hearts were filled not with faith, but with vanity. It was in this world that Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah walked, not as a man of wealth or status, but as a seeker of truth. From a young age, he devoted himself to knowledge. His thirst for learning led him to the side of one of the boldest scholars of his age, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. Their relationship was more than teacher and student. It was like a flame passed from one candle to another, a fire of courage and sincerity that could not be contained. Ibn Taymiyyah was no stranger to prison walls. His call for the purification of Islam from innovations, hypocrisy, and blind imitation made him a target of rulers and rival scholars. Ibn al-Qayyim stood beside him not in comfort, but in chains. Yet those prison years became a forge, shaping his heart into steel. He saw firsthand that intention was not an abstract theory. It was the difference between survival and despair, between courage and surrender. He later wrote that sincerity was like a sword that could cut through every chain, every trial. You could lock a man's body behind bars, but you could not imprison his intention. And indeed, even as the iron doors closed on him and his teacher, the knowledge they carried continued to flow, copied by students, spreading like a river that no walls could stop. In the heart of Damascus, people argued about appearances. Was this scholar more eloquent? Was that jurist more decorated? Who held the official position? Ibn al-Qayyim reminded them of the words of the Prophet. Indeed, Allah does not look at your forms or your wealth, but He looks at your hearts and your deeds. Sahih Muslim. Imagine how revolutionary this sounded in a society obsessed with prestige. A poor laborer sweeping the mosque with pure intention could be greater before Allah than a judge seated in silks, but poisoned by arrogance. Ibn al-Qayyim saw with painful clarity how often people traded the eternal for the temporary, chasing praise from men while neglecting the gaze of their Creator. There is a story told of a wealthy man in Damascus who loved to be seen giving in charity. He would walk through the marketplace with servants carrying bags of coins, making a spectacle of distributing them. Crowds would praise him, calling out his generosity. But one day, a beggar whispered to another, "Do you see his eyes? He never looks at us when he gives. He looks only at the people watching." Ibn al-Qayyim, hearing of such acts, would sigh and remind his students, "The true currency of the hereafter is intention. Without it, your treasure is dust." His lessons were not dry lectures. They were living reminders. He would sit in gatherings, his voice steady, his gaze lowered, and say, "Every act of worship has two conditions: sincerity to Allah and conformity to the sunnah of His messenger. If one is missing, the act collapses." His students wrote his words down with trembling pens, knowing they were recording truths that would outlast their own lives. Even in moments of personal trial, Ibn al-Qayyim held firm to this principle. When slander spread against him, when false accusations stained his name, he did not waste his nights defending his reputation. He would say, "If my intention is for Allah, then what people say cannot harm me. And if my intention is for people, then no amount of praise will save me." Through his teacher's imprisonment, through public opposition, through whispers of envy and malice, Ibn al-Qayyim lived a truth that every Muslim must face. The world will always measure you by appearances, but Allah measures you by what is hidden in your chest. And that is why he turned again and again to the Quran, because in it lies the blueprint for sincerity, the standard against which all hearts are measured. In the next part, we will open those verses together, the words of Allah that Ibn al-Qayyim built his entire philosophy upon. The Quran is not only a book of laws and stories, it is a mirror that reflects the state of the heart. And when Ibn al-Qayyim spoke about intention, he was not inventing something new. He was echoing verses that had already carved this truth into revelation. Listen to the words of Allah in Surah Al-Bayyinah 98:5. And they were not commanded except to worship Allah, being sincere to Him in religion, inclining to truth, and to establish prayer, and to give zakah. And that is the correct religion. Here, Allah does not speak of quantity. He does not say pray many prayers or give much wealth. He begins with sincerity, ikhlas. Worship without it is hollow. Ibn al-Qayyim explained that every command in the Quran is built on this foundation. Prayer without intention is movement. Charity without intention is loss of money. Fasting without intention is just hunger. Another verse he loved to remind his students of is in Surah Al-An'am 6:162-173. Say, "Indeed my prayer, my rites of sacrifice, my living and my dying are for Allah, Lord of the worlds. No partner has He, and this I have been commanded, and I am the first of the Muslims." Think about the totality of this declaration, not just prayer, not just sacrifice, but life and death. Every breath you take, every step you walk, every word you speak is either claimed by Allah through your intention, or it is wasted in the desert of this world. Ibn al-Qayyim would often emphasize this point. Intention is not only for the great acts of worship, it transforms the ordinary into extraordinary. Sleeping with the intention of resting to worship Allah better can be reward. Eating with the intention of strengthening your body to serve Allah can be reward. Even a smile given sincerely can weigh heavy on the scale. But the opposite is also true. Without intention, even the greatest deeds collapse into dust. Allah warns us in Surah Al-Ma'un 107:4-6, "So woe to those who pray, but who are heedless of their prayer, those who make show of their deeds." The danger is not in abandoning prayer, but in turning it into performance. Ibn al-Qayyim would say, "A man may bow his head to the ground 1,000 times, yet his heart never bows once to Allah." What use is the movement if the heart is absent? The Quran constantly redirects our vision back inward. Surah Al-Insan 76:8-9. And they give food in spite of love for it to the needy, the orphan, and the captive, saying, "We feed you only for the countenance of Allah. We wish not from you reward or gratitude." Here, Allah praises not the act of feeding alone, but the hidden statement of the heart. We feed you only for Allah's face. Ibn al-Qayyim explained that this verse teaches us the anatomy of sincerity. It is not enough to give. You must cleanse the act of any trace of seeking thanks, recognition, or praise. He wrote in Madarij al-Salikin, The sincere one is like a traveler walking at night. The stars guide him, not the lamps of people. In other words, if your path is lit by the applause of others, the darkness will swallow you as soon as they turn away. But if your compass is Allah, then even in the loneliest night, you walk in light. This philosophy was not abstract. Ibn al-Qayyim trained his own students to pause before every act and ask, "Why am I doing this?" If the answer was for Allah, then proceed. If not, then purify the intention or abandon the act. One student once asked him, "Master, how do I know if my intention is pure?" Ibn al-Qayyim answered, "When you do not care if people see your deed or ignore it, praise you or insult you, then you are close to sincerity." This echoes the Prophet's teaching, the most beloved deed to Allah is that which is done consistently, even if it is small. Why? Because the small deed, repeated with sincerity, outlives the loud but hollow gesture. The Quran reminds us again and again, sincerity is not a detail. It is the essence. It is the invisible force that makes the difference between a life written in gold and a life erased like chalk in the rain. In the next part, we will look at real examples from the Sunnah, moments where intention transformed ordinary actions into salvation, and where lack of sincerity destroyed even the greatest of deeds. The Prophet Muhammad often taught his companions not only through words, but through vivid stories, stories where intention was the dividing line between salvation and destruction. Ibn al-Qayyim preserved these lessons in his works, reminding Muslims that intention can elevate the smallest deed or strip the greatest act of all its worth. One of the most famous hadiths tells of a woman who lived a sinful life, yet she was forgiven by Allah because of a single act of mercy. She saw a thirsty dog panting near a well. Without hesitation, she removed her shoe, filled it with water, and gave it to the animal. That tiny gesture, unnoticed by the world, was recorded by Allah as a deed of immense sincerity. She did not do it for reputation, for applause, or for recognition. She did it out of compassion, purely for the sake of Allah, and Allah forgave her. Contrast this with another terrifying hadith recorded in Sahih Muslim. The Messenger of Allah said, "The first three people to be judged on the day of resurrection will be a scholar, a martyr, and a wealthy giver of charity. Each of them performed great deeds in the eyes of the world. The scholar taught knowledge, the warrior fought bravely, the wealthy man gave in abundance. Yet when Allah confronts them, He will expose their intentions. The scholar taught so people would call him learned. The warrior fought so people would call him courageous. The wealthy man gave so people would call him generous. They received their reward in this world, people's praise, but in the hereafter they will be dragged into the fire." Ibn al-Qayyim reflected on this hadith with trembling words. He said that these are not criminals or tyrants. They are people admired by society. And yet, because their hearts were not sincere, their grand acts turned into curses. He would often repeat, "A deed without sincerity is like a traveler carrying sand in his bags. He walks with effort, but arrives with nothing." There is also the hadith about migration, which scholars place at the very beginning of books of hadith as a reminder of its importance. Actions are judged by intentions, and every person will have only what he intended. Whoever migrated for Allah and His Messenger, his migration is for Allah and His Messenger. But whoever migrated to attain a worldly gain or to marry a woman, his migration is for that for which he migrated. Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. At that time, people were leaving Makkah for Medina, some sacrificing everything for their faith. But there was also a man who migrated only to marry a woman known as Qais. The companions nicknamed him the migrant of Qais. His journey looked the same as others, but its wait before Allah was entirely different. Ibn al-Qayyim highlighted this story to show that the hidden seed of intention decides whether a deed grows into a tree of reward or remains a dead twig. Even everyday acts could be transformed by intention. The Prophet said, "When a man spends on his family seeking reward from Allah, it is charity for him." Sahih Bukhari. Imagine this. Placing bread on the table for your children can carry the same reward as giving to the poor, if done with sincerity. Ibn al-Qayyim emphasized that the believer does not need to wait for extraordinary opportunities. He needs only to purify his intention in the ordinary. He also warned that Shaitan seeks to corrupt intentions more than actions. If he cannot stop you from praying, he will try to plant pride in your heart. If he cannot stop you from giving charity, he will whisper to make you show it off. Ibn al-Qayyim wrote that the battle for sincerity is constant, fought in the silence of the heart where no human eye can see. He used to advise, renew your intention before every act, and if you fall into showing off, repent, renew it again, and continue. Do not abandon deeds out of fear of insincerity, but fight for sincerity within them. The examples from the Sunnah are clear. Intention can rescue a sinner with a single act of kindness, and it can condemn a scholar, a warrior, or a philanthropist if their hearts seek other than Allah. This was Ibn al-Qayyim's timeless reminder, a reminder that weighs on every believer because no one is safe from the temptation of showing off. And so we come to the final part, where Ibn al-Qayyim's wisdom will meet our lives today. His voice, though centuries old, still whispers into our hearts, check your intention, renew it, protect it, because in the end, it is your hidden engine, your secret power, and your true destiny. Centuries have passed since Ibn al-Qayyim walked the streets of Damascus, yet his reminder feels as urgent today as it did then. Our world is louder now, flooded with images, recognition, and endless opportunities to display ourselves. Social media has turned daily life into a stage, and applause can come from strangers across the globe. But the question Ibn al-Qayyim would ask still cuts to the core. Why are you doing what you do? He wrote that the heart is like a king, and the limbs are its soldiers. If the king is corrupt, the soldiers will betray their mission. If the king is pure, the soldiers will serve with loyalty. This echoes the hadith of the Prophet. Indeed, there is a piece of flesh in the body. If it is sound, the whole body is sound, and if it is corrupt, the whole body is corrupt. Indeed, it is the heart. Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. Think about this. Your heart decides the weight of your deeds. A man can give millions in charity, but if his heart seeks only reputation, his hands return empty. Another may give a single coin, hidden in the night, unseen by anyone but Allah, and that coin could outweigh mountains. Ibn al-Qayyim urged his students to measure success, not by numbers or noise, but by the sincerity hidden within. He often reminded them of the Quranic principle. Whoever desires the harvest of the hereafter, we increase for him in his harvest, and whoever desires the harvest of this world, we give him thereof, but he will have no share in the hereafter. Surah Ash-Shura 42:20. The harvest you seek depends on the seed you plant in your heart. If you plant sincerity, your field will flourish in the eternal gardens. If you plant vanity, your crops will wither before the sun sets. Today, this reminder matters more than ever. When you post online, is it to inspire or to impress? When you pray in public, is it to connect with Allah or to be seen by people? When you help someone, is it for their smile or for Allah's pleasure? These are the questions that carve your destiny. Ibn al-Qayyim's life itself was proof. He endured prison, hardship, and criticism, but he left behind a legacy of books that continue to guide millions. Why? Because his intention was not tied to applause, but to Allah. His sincerity gave his words life beyond his lifetime. Empires have fallen, names of kings forgotten, but his wisdom remains alive. And so, this is the timeless reminder. Your intention is your hidden power. It can transform a breath into worship, a step into charity, a glance into mercy, or it can strip your greatest efforts into nothing but dust. No one else can see it. Only Allah knows, and that is enough. So as you close this story, ask yourself, what is the engine behind your actions? When you wake tomorrow, before you speak, before you act, whisper in your heart, this is for Allah. Because when your intention is for Him, nothing is wasted, and when it is not, nothing is saved. If this reminder touched your heart, don't let it stop here. Share it, so others may also remember. Subscribe for more stories that revive the soul. And most importantly, take this lesson into your life, because sincerity is not learned by hearing, but by living. Your intention is your destiny. Guard it, renew it, and let it guide you to paradise.